Hey everyone, and welcome to my Avatar Fire and Ash review. I want to start off apologizing because this is now coming an entire week late, but I have now watched the movie 3 times, so hopefully this review is super detailed and really good because it's really in my brain. Apologies for my voice. Somehow I caught, I don't even know what, but it sounds weird. Anyways, Avatar Fire and Ash. Man, I was so excited for this movie, and it delivered. When it starts off, we see Natam and Lowak flying, and I was like, oh, this is a memory. Cool. Nah, it's him being connected to the Metkaina version of the Soul Tree. So, right off the bat, I was already tearing up, and I'm like, this is a great way to start this movie. I also noticed that Lowak was narrating, which he then does for the entire movie, rather than Jake. That was really cool, because we also get to really see into his mind and how everything affects him around Natam's death. I like that we get to see how differently Jake, Neytiri, and Lowak mourn for Natam, where Neytiri has a song chord, which was cool to hear her sing that again. Jake's just going back down to the ship and collecting guns, and Lowak flies. I like how delicately the situation with Natam's death is treated, and it's done really well, because we can really see how much this is affecting Neytiri, where on top of the fact that she doesn't have her forest or her people, now she doesn't have her son, it really sucks, and I really feel bad for Neytiri. But Jake points out that she still has her family. She still has them, and that he's there for her, which I think is really cool. It really sucks that Payakan is still treated as an outcast, and I get it, but it's so dumb. And I do like how that's discussed, the Tulkun way, and how it's like, it's not gonna work because y'all are gonna get attacked, and if you're gonna just die if you don't defend yourselves. But that's just what they do. I was kind of surprised that Spider was still with Jake and his family, because he has to have a mask, and I doubt they're just gonna have those all handy, because at Highcliff they have all the resources and everything. So I was a little surprised that he was there, especially when it's shown that he's now suffocating because he's running out of oxygen, which that was a very stressful scene. And Neytiri didn't do anything. She just stood there. So you see that her dislike of the Sky People also coming into this movie. When the Wind Traders came, that was so cool. I'm not sure if both things attached to the ship are creatures. I would assume so. They look like they're both creatures. I know that the one that's in front is. I don't know what it's called, unfortunately. But they're so beautiful. And then when Jake discusses that Spider's leaving, obviously everyone has a problem with it. But my thing is, they're getting upset as if he wants Spider to leave because he doesn't like him. And he specifically says, if the battery dies, he will then also die. Clearly, he's doing this because he cares. But whatever, kids don't see it that way. And everyone gets angry. And it's so frustrating because it makes sense for him to leave because he's not safe there. Then Jake and Neytiri discuss it, and they all go, which is really cool because then we get to see all the functions of the ships and the creatures, and I love that. Avatar's such a beautiful film. All of them, they're just visually stunning. And then we also get to see that Lowak mourns Natam by flying because he feels him with him, and he talks to him while he's doing that, and I was like, that's so sweet. And then we see more of where Lowak, he just can't do things right, and I really feel bad because I don't think he's intentionally doing the wrong thing. He cares about not doing the wrong thing, but it's not super intentional to make sure he's doing the right thing, where he forgets the comms, he gets in trouble. And then, shortly after that scene, we have the Monuan Raiders who come out, and then we meet Varong. I think her design is really interesting. I like it to an extent. It's very interesting because there's such a formidable force, especially when the Wind Traders have the ships that they do, which are completely flammable, and all of the raiders are using fire, so you're really stuck with that. That whole fight was really cool, though. The one Monuan raider that holds up whatever bag of something, and then Varong says, I am the fire, and shoots it, and he just kamikazes down into the thing, and I'm like, what? That was so intense. Bro was just like, I'll die. Cool. And then Neytiri gets shot, which was shown in the trailer, but was different actually seeing it because I completely forgot that was going to happen. And I knew she wasn't going to die, but I was still panicked because she just kept falling and falling. And I was like, oh gosh, I didn't know what was going to happen. It was very stressful. And then Log doesn't have his comm again, and Spider doesn't have his backup mask, which is mentioned many times because it keeps beeping. Eventually they escape from the Monuan Raiders on ground, which is interesting when Varong finds the one raider who is shot dead by Loak and finds the bullet. Because already earlier, when Jake was using whatever gun he was using, she was instantly captivated, in a sense, by it itself. Which is interesting because none of the Na'vi use guns. Which then shows the difference between the Monuan and other Na'vi tribes, because they all follow very similar rules and have similar morals. But Varong, she does not care about pretty much anything, and everything relating to Awa. But when the kids escape, Loak seems to be very afraid of being in charge. He does not want to be put in charge. When they're asking what they should do and how to figure out how to get back to Jake and whatnot. And what I wasn't expecting was Jake and Quaritch to sort of team up temporarily to go get the kids. And then Lyle's just like, this isn't the mission. We're not supposed to be doing this. But he completely ignores him, which I don't really like Lyle, which obviously he's not one of the good guys, so I'm not going to like him. But seeing Neytiri get back on her Ikran and fly out was really cool, because I feel like we got to see some semblance of personality in her Ikran, because the Ikran are very protective of their riders, extremely, and I like that we get to see that in here, where she helps Neytiri get onto her back and they fly off to High Cliff. The whole sequence where Kitty helps Spider breathe is so interesting, because it's the same thing or similar thing that was done with Jake in the first movie. But it was really cool to see this happen because he didn't have an avatar, it was just a person. And then again, Kitty has a seizure towards the end, I'm assuming, because of her connection, which she did a lot for the movie and was okay, but I'm guessing that was because she was stopped partially the way through and she wasn't doing it for an excessive amount of time. It was really cool to see the teamwork between Quaritch and Jake when they actually found the kids. Varong's, I'm guessing it was a fake laugh or something, because she sounded scared or nervous, or she was laughing because she was going to stop them. I don't really know how to explain what emotions she was feeling. But I think it's very interesting that she does a forced connection. I don't know if it's called Sehelu, if that's something different, where she attaches the kudus. It's a very interesting method to get someone to submit. I love how she refers to the guns as making thunder. And Quaritch could have said something, because there's a part when she's like, oh, well, I have no need for you. He could have been like, but it's going to run out of thunder soon, so then you'll need me then. I think it's really cool how Kitty does, again, the thing with the plant, and they attack. Because I feel like any Na'vi can do that. If they wanted to, they could do that. I read somewhere that Awa is not, in a sense, an actual, like, deity or goddess. I'm pretty sure that Awa is the network of the mycelium of the forest. And in essence, each tree is a neuron, and some perform input and output duties, like the Tree of Souls, and the Spirit Tree, which is the one that the Metkayina have, and some are just storage. And then the mycelium are a network. And how I think of it, it's like a giant global supercomputer in a sense. But rather than some artificial intelligence kind of type thing, it's just a bunch of different parts working together to form a sort of computer network in a sense, which is what Grace talks about. And because she says they can upload and download data onto all the different trees, memories and things like that. And they did so at sites like the Tree of Souls, which is also why when we actually saw Awa towards the end of the movie, I was very confused, because I was like, oh, it's an actual person? But I'll get into that later when we get to that part. The whole sequence of the Menquan while the other group is tied up was very interesting and very weird and uncomfortable for me. But I was very glad to see that Neytiri got back to high camp safely. That was good. And then she wakes up and she's completely panicked and not listening to what anybody says. I do like how Quaritch in this movie does seem very different from Quaritch in Avatar, the first one. And the second one, he seems like himself, but a little different. And I think that he's kind of becoming his own person rather than just a clone in a sense of the original Quaritch. And it's really cool how they explain the whole thing with Spider, because the whole mycelium is in him and they're keeping each other alive, which is really cool. And it sucks because if the RDA were to get him and study him, as they do, then they would probably figure out a way to reverse engineer that and have humans living on Pandora. And that would suck, as Jake says. And then we get into the whole thing with Kitty and her birth, which I didn't think she had a father to begin with, because when I learned that the actress that plays Kitty is Sigourney Weaver and is the same as Grace, I was like, oh, so it's probably just the same person. It's probably, I don't know what word they used. It's just her, a clone in a sense. But I thought it was very interesting how Neytiri's mother calls her the child of Awa. And that's very interesting. Because that's how that would have to work. There wouldn't be any other way for her to be born. But the Tulkun Council is really cool. But they annoy me to no end because I find them very aggravating. Like, I get that, oh, no fighting, and when you fight, whoever dies is on your hands, regardless of if it's your fault. I understand that, but I don't agree with that. It doesn't make sense to me why that would be a thing. Because it's like, oh, would you meet violence with more violence, there's just going to be more violence. But it's like, if you don't fight back, then everyone's going to die. And they exile him farther from where he already was, so no one can hear his song. And I'm like, come on. And half of what he said wasn't even true, which was so frustrating to no end. But that's just their choice. So I had a sour feeling about them. And then afterwards, with Loak and Jake, where he, in a sense, basically just blamed Loak for his brother's death. That was hard, because Jake realized what he said, like, a second after he said it. And Loak is just, it wasn't my fault. It wasn't his fault that the Tam was gone. And then going from that to him taking the gun and almost killing himself. I wasn't 100% sure if he would go through with it or not, and I really hoped he wouldn't. I was just caught in the moment, and I was just like, please don't. And I was crying so profusely. It's crazy because Neytiri said something to Jake, oh, you'll lose another son. Obviously, she didn't mean literally lose him in that sense to death, but it was so weird that she said that, and then Loak almost actually did take his own life. But the whole conversation between Jake and Neytiri about not blaming Loak, but then Jake blaming himself, which I'm sure he 100% does, because Neytiri says, you said that you could protect this family, this you said that you could do. And then Neytiri switches slightly and is like, and we're hiding that pink skin, which more of her hatred of the Sky People comes out, which makes sense to an extent because a lot of the Sky People are bad and they are coming to destroy everything. But then there are some of them that are actually good, and we have seen this. And for example, Jake was a human. And that whole thing when she talks about that, he's like, but you already did choose because I was human. And he's like, I still am somewhere inside. I'm still human. And he's like, oh, do you hate me? Do you hate your children? And this, oh my gosh, the whole conversation, it was so intense. But I do like that after that he goes and comforts her. I think that was sweet. But it was a very intense conversation. I love how it was Kitty and Saraya who found Loak. They were the right ones to go and find him. And I'm glad that Loak kept the bow and that Saraya helped him start to fix it. But on to the scene with Quaritch when he goes to find Varang. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. That was very interesting. The fact that Varang could just see Lyle within a second of looking for him was so unsettling. And she just kept looking at him. And I'm like, I'd be terrified of that. And then the whole scene at her tent with everything, that was very discomforting. I did not like that. But I will say Quaritch's dialogue was very funny to an extent. It really put a damper on how intense and weird the situation was, because he's just like, whoa there, which was a little funny. And then they form their alliance, which makes sense, and I knew was going to happen because it just made sense logically. And it sucks, and because the Monuan are such a formidable force to begin with the fire and all their methods that they use, and now giving them guns is so much worse. I could just see how bad this was going to be and how bad it was going to turn out, because you have the swiftness and the agility of a Na'vi, and you're giving them a gun. It's just not good. I do like that Saraya goes to Loak and it's like, hey, my sister knows where Payakan is. And the fact that she just told him that and didn't expect him to go run off and find him is crazy. You thought he just would be like, okay, cool, nice information, and do nothing with that. Obviously, he's going to go try to find him. But I do love that. Neytiri's so happy when Loak gives her the bow. And I know why Jake didn't want Loak to show Neytiri the broken one, but I'm glad that he was able to fix it. And it looks just like it. And I'm glad that Saraya, Rotso, and Aonung also go to find him, because Aonung and Rotso were mean. Rotso? I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. I like that we get development from them instead of just being mean from the first movie, and that they're actually good people. And then we cut to the part where we have Quaritch comes to get Jake, and beforehand, Kiri and Spider are just getting water, I think. And she kisses him, which I was a little surprised because I really didn't see that happening in this movie. If anything, it would be something between Soraya and Loak, but I guess not. And then Quaritch gets Spider. I feel like they wouldn't have fired at part of the village if Jake and Neytiri weren't talking for such a long time. But I do love how we can see her dedication towards Jake as a wife. I think that's really cool that that's brought up a lot in the movie. Like in the beginning where Ronal is saying something like, oh, he should be doing this. And Neytiri's like, I would never speak out against my husband. I just think that's really cool. That's shown a lot more in this one. I also love how she's like, I'm not leaving. I will be staying here and I will kill many. And he's like, you will not kill many. You will not lift that bow. To which she does so. And then he tries again to be like, no, you're just going to take me and not her. I felt like it didn't make sense for him to try to lead the Metcaina and defy all the Navi that were there, the Menquan and the RDA. But I do see what he was trying to do because he did not want Neytiri involved and did not want her to get captured. And the fact that they were just staring at each other the whole time that he's being taken away, was so emotional. And then I thought she shot Quaritch for a second. I really did. Like, not lethally, but I thought that she shot maybe in the shoulder or something. But she did not, so it's very frustrating. Because I really wasn't sure what was going to happen to Jake. How was going to happen? I'm sure it's fortified, so they can't get in. And then we cut to Loak and Soraya and Aonung and Rotso as they all reconvene and they fight off the Seong. I think that's what they're called. I'm not 100% sure. They fight off those, and then Payakan's there. And then we see Taunok. And I was like, oh no. Because the poor Tulkun has a hole gouged out in its face where its eyes are missing. And I'm like, that's so sad. There's no one left of Payakan's clan except for this Tulkun, and that's it. And I was like, oh no, that's terrible. But I feel like it was a necessary thing because now when they meet the council, it's like, yeah, it's just us two. We're the only ones left. And Taunok only survived because he fought back. Like, if you don't fight back, everyone's gonna die. And then when we cut back to Jake and Quaritch, he talks to him about actually seeing how the people see, which I really could see something happening where Quaritch does in some way, shape, at some point turn against the RDA. I don't know. Because a lot of what happens with him is very similar with what happened to Jake. And he's following along a very similar-esque path, just it looks different compared to Jake. But I really could see him really leaning more towards becoming more like the Na'vi. And throughout the movie, he goes from wearing a full uniform to the body paint and all the things and has just a vest on from the uniform. So it's very interesting. And I like how Neytiri goes out to find Jake. She really committed to the role. Her ikran was painted. She was completely painted, had a whole outfit. It was very fast that she did that. And I'm glad that she takes the arrows that Jake made because it's a lot more efficient than just using the regular arrows. And I love how Ian goes to break out Jake because I always liked Ian as a character because he was one of the good ones. Because it's always the scientists. They're the good guys because they don't like what all the people are doing because either they're just like, we're just here getting paid and we're just destroying everything, or the people who are just like, we're going to get money from doing all these terrible things. I like that. He goes, he doesn't want to hurt people, but he really wants to break him out. Then he's like, I have no plan. It was just this much. I like that Spider also finds Jake. And it was weird seeing him full outfit and clothing because he doesn't ever do that. But it's cool to see that they've got some bond that we see in the film and progress throughout. Because he really cares about him. I think that's cool. And the last one where Jake is like a son for a son. I don't know. And then Neytiri swoops in and they all escape. And then Jake is like, you were right. We should probably kill him. And Neytiri's like, wait. Hold on, regretting what she said. When Jake leads Spider away to the clearing to kill him, you can just see how hard it is for him, and he's just saying the whole thing for when you do a kill. The whole scene reminded me so intensely of Abraham and Isaac, where Abraham goes to sacrifice his son and almost does so before the Lord stops him, and he doesn't. And it really reminded me of that because in this sense, Jake's not, in a sense, sacrificing him. He's just killing him so that RDA can't use him to come and take over and do everything. But it's Jake that stops himself. And I love how Neytiri realizes this because she washes off her face and she's the red paint on her hands. And I'm sure she's thinking about the blood that's on her hands. Or if Jake actually goes through and kills Spider and then runs back to stop him. I love that because we get to really see that Neytiri does care. She's not just saying that against Spider because she doesn't like him or care for him. But it was so heartbreaking because I was already super sad at this point because I really thought that he was going to kill Spider. And then he calls him dad, and then I'm like, oh gosh, no, they can't kill Spider. Oh gosh, that whole scene was so emotional. Oh my gosh. And then they're all just sitting there and hugging, and it was a very stressful scene to witness. It was nice to see Natiri not being racist against Spider, so that was nice. And then, oh man, one of my favorite parts of the whole movie is when we just see Jay climbing up the rocks of the Hallelujah Mountains, and I knew instantly when I watched the first time that he was going to go get Toruk. I was like, yes, this is the time. This is the moment I have been waiting for. And then he goes in the cave and he gets him, and I'm like, yes, finally. I was so excited. And then he does the whole thing, and we have Loak narrating again, and he gets the clans together, he gathers them, they're all ready to fight, and then they go to the Tulkun, and they meet with the council elders. And again, they're like, oh no, if we fight, bringing violence to more violence will only lead to more violence. And it's like, yes, but if you don't fight, everyone's going to die. It's so frustrating. But then Loak comes in with Payakan and the others, and he's like, I can speak here, I'm brother of Tulkun. And then they're like, oh no, he's an outcast, you can't talk. And the other three are just like, we are outcasts if he can't speak. And so the council let him speak, and he has a whole thing. He speaks for Payakan, and then Payakan speaks, and then Taunok comes in and is like, I'm the last of our clan. I'm the blind witness to our destruction. I don't know exactly what is said. And then the council's like, oh, we'll discuss this. What is there to discuss? Do you want all of the pods to get destroyed? What do you have to discuss? Should we all die or should we all fight back? I don't know. I get the change and that there's a way that things are done. But that was before you had these people who were coming in with these near indestructible weapons and machines that could kill you in an instant. That was before this. The things need to change. But anyways, after that, they're all getting ready for the final battle that's coming. And Kiri approaches Ronal, who also mentions that she doesn't think that she'll survive the coming fight. And my thought there is, then just don't go in. If they have one less person, I'm 100% sure that won't affect things that drastically. Especially when you are literally in the process of being in labor. It doesn't make sense. It was different in the last movie. Yes, she was still pregnant, so I was like, that doesn't make the most sense for her to fight, but alright. But when you're almost in labor, you don't do that. It does not make sense. Why would you go in, especially if you know that? To me, it didn't make sense. And I was like, whatever. I guess that's your choice. It's very frustrating. But I do love when the RDA do begin their assault and they go towards the group of the Tulkun, that they're like, oh wait, hold on. The elders, the bigger ones aren't here. And then you just see all the Tulkun underneath. And I like how the matriarch leads. And I did not realize how big they could get because Payakan looks huge. And then the lead matriarch is 5 times his size. And I was like, oh my gosh. But they do mention that they just keep growing. I love that they finally came, and I was like, yes. See, I'm glad that they decided the right thing. Them having to decide was annoying, but they finally chose the right option. And they begin their assault, and then everyone just goes down. They fly off from the rocks, all the Ikrans, and then all the skim wings are all going from the water. They're getting bomb rushed from every angle. It was amazing. It was great. And obviously everything's going great. They're winning. They're destroying all the things. And then the Monuan come. And I'm like, oh gosh, this is going to be bad. Because they have the agility because of their Ikrans. And then they have the freaking guns. So it's like, this is a very potent mix. This is a very dangerous combination here. And they start losing. And then Kitty's like, oh, I have to do something. Which Ronal says, if you can do something, you need to do it. And here she is like, oh, I have to go connect to the tree. And then she jumps in the water, just goes. And so does Loak and Spider, again, leaving Took by herself. You guys need to stop abandoning her because this keeps happening where she keeps getting left by herself. She keeps getting brought into these situations and she's too little to be dealing with this. She can't defend herself. She can try and she does try, but she can't. And then Kitty connects to the tree, is going through the forest again, which is really interesting that it shows her going through trees. There's this bright light, it's getting brighter, and the wind gets stronger, and she can't go farther. And then Spider comes in, and they get a little bit farther, and then Took comes in, and they get really far, and then they come out. And as they're going through, it turns into water. The wind does, which is so interesting. They get out, and they see Awa, who looks like a person, which is very weird, but I was talking about this with someone, and she said that the whatever image of AWOL was shown, it looked like she had eyebrows, and she suggested that it could just be Kitty projecting like her, what she looks like, onto whatever she would imagine Awa being and what she would want to see or something of the sort. That could be it. But then the spirit tree gets hit with a blast, and I thought it was destroyed. I thought it got broken or blown up, and I was like, oh my gosh, because you can't detach them from that forcefully. And so I was like, are they okay? And then Kitty starts sinking, and I'm like, oh gosh, this isn't gonna be good. I don't even know if I thought that she was dead or not. I really just don't know. And then everyone just keeps getting shot and dying. Roxo dies. Natiri Zikran gets shot from Varang. Ronal gets shot. Payakan is shot. Jake is then shot, and so is Toruk. And I'm like, oh my gosh. When things go really wrong, they can't just be like, oh no, a slight inconvenience. When things are going wrong, bad things start happening. People start dying. And it's so frustrating. But Spider gets took, returns her to the surface. Natiri's like, I'm down. And Jake's like, that's it. And just like, you can hear that he just gives up. There's no hope for doing anything. And then Lowak pulls him ashore, and they're together. And then Spider, who brings Took to the surface, goes back down to Kitty, who has the butterfly thing underwater that helps them breathe, which is a really cool thing. And then with Ronal, Natiri finds her, brings her to shore as well, and she's actually in labor at that point. Natiri is there to help her, which I think their relationship is cool. And so they don't really like each other, but they have a semblance of respect for each other. And it sucks that Ronal dies, because first off, I feel like she could have survived, because I feel like the shot, because it was still there, I feel like it wasn't as bad. But oh my goodness, Pril looks so adorable. She's just she's so small. And I feel like no one really talked about the baby being there. Varang doesn't say anything about it. Neither does Jake when they reunite. Does no one notice that there's a baby in the little arrow satchel thing? Does nobody actually see that? The baby's being pretty quiet, so I could see that, because she doesn't really make much sound for some weird reason, despite having just been born. But Natiri takes the baby and speaks highly of Ronal, which I think is good. It's really cute. It's a very nice scene. And then we cut back to Jake and Lowak, and he apologizes for abandoning his post and having failed again. And then Jake's like, I'm proud of you. And I was like, oh my gosh, that scene, it was a great contrast to him practically blaming him for Natam's death to this. And then gets taken. Tuka gets taken because she's alone again, and I actually jumped in my seat when that happened, because it startled me. And then Korch and Varang take Natiri, so they have Natiri and Tuk. And then Korch demands that Jake bring him Spider, and that whole thing. And then the RDA are still going to get the Tulkun, and I was surprised, because I feel like they would have quit by then, but it's a lot of money, and so they continue their assault. But the Seong, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right again, but they come up from the deep, and Kitty communicates with them, which is really cool. Because again, I feel like most Na'vi can do this. I feel like some of them, they really could, but I don't know. Maybe it's not. Kitty might just be really special, as it is mentioned quite a few times that she's the chosen one and she's special to some extent. But those things attack, and I think that they're adorable. They have such big eyes, and they're just, I think they're very cute. But they attack everyone, which is great. And I know at some point, Payakan finds the main guy who has his arm cut off in the way of water. I don't know his name. I don't like him, so I didn't try to learn his name. He takes him and drowns him, which I was like, you know what? That makes sense. Not him. Sorry. Tanuk drowns him, which I thought was great for what he did to the whole clan. And then we see that Toruk is alive. I thought he drowned. I was so sad. I was like, oh no, is he dead? Because I didn't see him. But then when I watched it the third time, I noticed that he was actually on the rocks outcropping. And I was like, he didn't die. He's actually fine. And then he does a roar and all the Akron come down. And I'm like, yes, we're back in the game. And they start winning again. And everything is great. And then Jake and Lowak board the ship, and Kiri and Spider board the ship from a different. And they just start closing in the area with Varang and her little Monuan people and Quaritch. And I thought Jake is just like, don't shoot anybody you love. That makes sense. It was a weird line, I felt like. But they're all closing in on different areas. And then Spider's like, hey, you take me and you let go of them, and nothing else will happen. And I was surprised that Quaritch agreed to that, because he really wants to get at Jake, but he really wants Spider more and cares about him more, which I feel like continues to show the difference between this Quaritch and the old Quaritch, the one that actually died. Jake points out a few times that, hey, you just have the memories of him. You're not actually him. You can be who you want to be. You don't have to be him, which I think is really cool. And we do see that, because he does seem very different from him. And then as Quaritch is agreeing to Spider's terms, Jake comes up and starts attacking. Lowak shoots from the shadows wherever he is, and Kitty approaches Varang. And oh my gosh, that whole part, she is a whole different beast right there. because Ron goes to get Natiri, and Kitty just comes up from behind with her Kuru, and it's just like, and they connect, and she's just on her in a second. And Varong looks scared. Varong looks genuinely terrified. I was like, dang. And then she runs off and goes somewhere. And then Quaritch follows by taking Spider and also taking off. And part of me felt like Jake should have called Toruk, but I feel like with the whole sequence, the Skimwing does get injured and falls out of the sky, which I feel like wouldn't have happened with Toruk, so they had to get something that wasn't formidable and actually super, super dangerous. Like the Skimwings are, but I feel like it made sense that Toruk wasn't the one that he called. Plus, he's also really injured, so... Anyways, they fly up to the vortex thing. I'm really hoping that the general lady, don't know her name, that she dies because I don't like her. She is one of my least favorites in the whole thing. I don't like her. But they fall, Jake is injured on the ground, and Spider goes to his defense. And Quaritch is like, you wouldn't hurt me. And he seems really confident about this, saying as he goes to approach him, and then Spider just shoots him, and he's like, oh, nah, he's not messing around. Because he's only called him dad simply to just make him emotionally connect to him, but only to get what he wants out of a situation. He didn't want the dog tags for an emotional reason. He didn't want to be like, oh, I should probably have my dad's dog tag. He didn't care. He wanted to escape. That's why. He didn't care about anything. And Quaritch seems to think so. He's really falling for it because I don't think Spider cares at all. And he's like, I really shouldn't have saved you. I really should. He regrets that, I'm sure, 100%. But after that, Jake and Quaritch have their whole fight sequence again. And then Spider falls. And I thought that Jake would go after him first, but Quaritch does. Which then leads to the whole Jake having to help him up. And they have their part 2 of their conversation of, you don't have to be like him. You can be your own thing. You can become more like the people and whatever. And then Natiri and Lowak and Kitty and Took, they all swoop in and they're there. And he just jumps off. And I was like, I actually didn't see that coming. I actually wasn't sure what was going to happen, but I didn't see that coming. I feel like it looked like he died, but I really don't think he did. I'm so confident. I know they wouldn't do that. If he actually died, it would be a whole big dramatic thing of him dying. Maybe Varong swooped in or Hizikran swooped in, but he's not dead. And I was like, great. Again, he just survives. But then that's it. And then we have Lok narrating again, and we see Tonawari with his other children and Pril as she is having the first communion with Awa along with the other calves and the reef babies, which is so cute. But they don't bring any attention to Ronald's death because in The Way of Water we have Natayam's death, which has a whole ceremony thing for it, but Ronald doesn't have that. But I figure that makes a bit more sense because the calf communion is on a specific day and they wouldn't just postpone that for some sort of ceremony for her death. But I feel like that would be a great way to start off the next movie, is to start off with that. I don't know, I just feel like that would make a lot of sense. And it was really cool that Spider got to see the ancestors. Oh my gosh, the whole part was so emotional because you got to see everyone who's died. And all like the main people, like Sute, Grace, Ronald was there, Natayam was there, Ratso was there. I was looking for Silwenin, Natiri's older sister who died before the events of Avatar. I didn't see her. I feel like maybe I did. I have heard that she is in there somewhere, but you can only see part of her top. I will definitely be looking out for that the next time I see the movie. But the ending was weird because the first 2 movies end with Jake's eyes opening, and this one ended with a zoom out shot of all of Pandora, but the spiritual realm area, I'm guessing, and anybody's eyes opening. Which I get, it would have been repetitive to do Jake with the same underwater thing, but it would have made sense to do Lowak because Jake narrated the first 2 and his eyes opened in those 2. And then in this, Lowak was the one narrating, so it would have made sense if his eyes opened in the scene. That would have been cool, but no, we got the weird zoom out thing, which wasn't bad. It was just really different and it didn't feel like an Avatar ending. But overall, a really good movie. I really enjoyed it. So on for my rating. For the story and plot, I would probably give it an 8 because I feel like part of it feels a little bit repetitive of the first 2 parts of it. It's very similar things that are happening, just different events in a sense. For characters and acting, I would give it a 9 because the acting was really good. I'm not surprised. It always is. And Varang's character was very interesting and very different from anything I've seen in different other characters throughout the Avatar movies. Visuals and cinematography obviously gets a 10 because Avatar is just visually stunning. Pandora is so beautiful and I'm always blown away. Sound and music, I'm going to give that a 9 because the music's always good. Pacing and editing, I feel like the end felt a little bit rushed, but Other than that, it was pretty good pacing throughout and cutting through to different scenes. So I'll give that a 9. I think that was good. And for emotional impact, oh my gosh, that's a 10. Because it's emotional roller coaster the entire time. Originality, it is the third movie in the series. But excluding that fact, it was pretty similar to the first two in the way of how it progressed, in a sense. But it was a very original storyline with the Monuan, so I'll give that a 7. Enjoyment. Overall, how much I liked it, I think I'll give that a 9. And all of that will add up to an 8.9. There it is. That is my rating for the movie. Those are my thoughts. I would love to know any of y'all's opinions down in the comments below. Overall, really great movie. Eagerly awaiting the next one, which I believe is releasing in 2029, so a good distance between those two. But that's all I have for this one. I hope you all have a blessed day, and peace out.